Daddy was red and I was brown and my sister was fair.
Right. So you were a fine-looking girl, in other words, I think.
I suppose.
And you're still a fine-looking woman.
They say that anyhow.
No, I wouldn't just say that just to please you. No.
Oh, no, I know you wouldn't.
No.
There were several dance halls in the district had that. Even in Dublin, I remember going.
So even when you were courting this young lady, you had
It make any difference.
You had to hand her over to somebody else.
You had to hand her over to somebody else. You wouldn't know what you were getting.
Ballyknockan was always regarded as a woolly stone.
Woolly?
Woolly, because it was binded together in its grain, so when you'd split it, it would take fierce pressure to get it to tear apart, and it would tear.
I loved it from the first day. I started cutting stone at a 12-year-old.
12 years of age.
I did.
This beautiful lake, nestling in the Wicklow hills behind me, looks as if it's been here forever, or at least since the last ice age departed the scene many thousands of years ago. But in actual fact, it's only been here since 1940, and it wasn't put here to look beautiful, it was created to slake the thirst of the citizens of Dublin some 50 kilometres away. And that's not the only thing from County Wicklow that you'll find in Dublin's fair city, because much of the character of that city's architecture was forged in the granite quarries of these hills, and many of its most celebrated and iconic buildings owe their existence to the skill, the craftsmanship and the sheer industry of the stonecutters who've been plying their trade here for centuries. Welcome to the village and townland of Ballyknockan in the parish of Blessington in County Wicklow. Mountainside and meadowland, lakeshore, forest and blanket bog are the surface adornments that nature and humankind have fashioned to clothe the massive band of granite that underlies much of western Wicklow. By the time Patrick Olligan brought the skills of stone cutting to Ballyknockan in the 1820s, the men of Golden Hill Quarries in Kilbride Parish, away to the north of this Blessington Lake, had already used the pick of their own granite to provide the building blocks of Georgian Dublin, and the results of their labours can still be viewed and wondered at on either side of the Liffey's banks. Ballyknockan granite was considered to be the finest of them all, quarried and cut and dressed on site before being carted overnight to Dublin, ready to be slotted into the city's new churches, banks and railway stations. Throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th, these hills would be ringing with the song of metal on stone, as hundreds of craftsmen chiselled and sculpted the rocks of Wicklow into the shapes of city streets and buildings, and used the offcuts to lend a kind of rural grandeur to their own humble dwellings, outhouses and laneways. When the men of Kilbride first travelled to Ballyknockan, they could have walked across the valley floor that now lies hidden beneath the waters of Poulaphuca Reservoir. Since 1939, this lake has hidden much of the recent past from view. But ironically, perhaps, it's also revealed a far older past. Chris Corlett is an archaeologist who's discovered, along the shoreline, abundant evidence that many thousands of years ago there were stone cutters living here. Stone cutters who supplied the scant population of Neolithic Ireland with goods of Wicklow granite.
This was found, I suppose, a little bit further up the lake here, about half a mile up the lake, but it's one of dozens that have turned up on the shoreline here of the reservoir.
Dozens?
Dozens. We've got a large number. One site in particular has turned up dozens of, just from one location alone, but actually all along the shoreline here we've been finding stones just like this. So this is a saddle cornice for grinding probably cereals, maybe other things too, but largely we think used for grinding cereals to make bread for flour.
And this other smaller stone beside it, is that was used on top of that for the grinding purpose?
Yeah, here we have what we call a rubber stone, so this would have been used to do the actual grinding itself.
What kind of stone did you call it?
A rubber stone.
Rubber stone?
Yeah.
It's anything but rubber, because I carried it over here, and it's but for rubbing along
exactly,
the top of
for
that.
rubbing along. So they're both made of granite. They're both very, very hard stones. They're perfectly suited for grinding.
Right.
Because they have a bit of a rough edge as well.
Right, so they'll last an awful long time, in other words. And
exactly.
They won't chip away and all the rest of it.
And this being granite country, these are certainly produced from granite that was sourced here in the area.
So this was a kind of a quernstone sourcing area, in other words, because of the granite?
Yeah, I mean, we've just so many of them turning up, and some of them are quite clearly still in manufacture, have never been used.
Right.
So we believe that they're actually being manufactured here in this area, and possibly being shipped to many parts of the country then.
So almost on a commercial basis, in other words.
It would appear to be on a commercial basis, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So they would trade these for other
Exactly.
things.
Trade them for things like flint, which wasn't native here. You didn't get flint here,
Right.
or good quality flint. And flint was very, very important if you wanted to make, knives or scrapers, and the type. That was the technology of the day. It was a stone technology. This is an example of it, but flint was very, very important.
But you have been finding bits of flint along the shoreline as well, isn't
Yeah,
that the
we've been
case?
finding bits of flint, and I have
You've
an
one
example here. This is a
scraper of some sort?
flint scraper, yeah, and
Right.
this is probably from the Stone Age, from the Neolithic, so roughly 5,500 years ago. I also have here actually another example of an artifact from this period, staying with stone technology again. This is a stone axe.
Right.
It's a polished stone axe.
That's not granite.
No, this isn't granite, it's a type of shale, we think, and again, this was found on the shoreline here in the reservoir.
So these two bits here in hand would have come from somewhere else in the country, in other words. Is that the case?
Well, the shale may have come locally, that you
Right.
do get shale
You
here.
can
but-
get that here.
And flint does come locally, but this type of flint looks like it's come from probably up the north.
From the Antrim coast or some place
Possibly
like
somewhere,
that.
yeah. As
So
far,
even
far
back
north as
5,000 years ago, people were trading commodities up and down the country. in other
Absolutely, yeah,
words.
yeah, yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right. So this was the cornerstone capital of the country, more or less, around here
Exactly.
because of the granite.
Exactly, yeah, yeah.
Now, the reason that you've been able to find these things, ironically, is because of the lake here,
Exactly,
which has
because
only
of
been
the
here,
lake.
what, 75 years?
It's only here 75 years. It's hard to imagine it. You look at it today and it looks like it's been here all the time for centuries. And
Well, interestingly, whenever you showed me your photographs of the outline of the Neolithic houses that were found along the shore,
that's right. Yeah,
I
yeah.
said to you, "Oh, that's handy. They had the house right beside the lake."
Yeah.
And of course, you're able to point out, no, there was no lake back in those
there was
days.
no lake here. Yeah, we found two Stone Age houses here. Both of them. One of them, in fact, was just over here. Another one on just about half a mile up that way. And both of those would have originally been actually overlooking the King's River.
So the
which
river
is-
was here.
there
That
was
would have
a
been the
river here,
attraction
yeah,
for
yeah,
them.
exactly. That was the attraction. Now we've got a lake in the place of where there was once the King's River, and further up then you've got the Liffey as well. So both of those rivers were used to create this reservoir 75 years ago.
Right, and it's the action of the water and the reservoir that has unearthed these things. Is that the case?
Yeah, well, effectively what the reservoir has been doing over the last 75 years, it's been eroding all the soil. And it's-
Sorry, when you say the soil, you mean this stuff here in the banks
exactly
along beside us?
the topsoil and even part of the subsoil has been just eroded away, removed by the reservoir.
Right.
And what we're finding now are the objects that were in that soil originally and have just been left lying on the shoreline.
So these were on the lake shore, so to speak, but what the lake shore, of course, wasn't a lake shore in those days. It was just simply under fields, in other words.
Exactly.
yeah?
This was all agricultural land until 75 years ago. This was actively used for farming, and of course people were living here. And now we have evidence that people were living here for thousands of years.
So the tradition, and indeed the industry of stone cutting in these parts, is much older than anyone previously imagined. But farming on this land is older still. And when, in the year 1939, the King's River and the River Liffey were dammed to create the Poulaphuca Reservoir to provide a much-needed water supply for Dublin, over 70 farming homesteads were served compulsory purchase orders, and the people who lived in them were instructed to gather their belongings and quit their homes forever. Compensation was given, of course, but how do you put a price on generations of attachment to house and land? But there was no standing in the way of progress, and no hope of resisting the rising waters. The distinguished place name scholar Liam Price had the prescience in that fateful year to organise a survey of the soon-to-be flooded area, and urged local people to take photographs of the doomed townlands for posterity. We are that posterity, and Chris Corlett has brought all of this work together and produced a painstaking and inevitably poignant chronicle of the last days of the lost valleys.
The foundations of those houses are still out there, and there were a lot of bogs in this area and lots of little rivers and streams apart from the King's River itself. And so this was a very important source of fuel for the local communities. So that was one of the things that was lost, not just the agricultural land, but actually the source of turf for so many people living here.
So that must have been, I mean, if we cast our minds back, it's not that long ago. I know there are people still alive here, and
That's right.
for whom that was a fairly traumatic event. Because, I mean, it's not that they were given any choice in the matter, but they were standing in the way of progress, so to speak.
They weren't given any choice in the matter. In fact, Tim Lennon, who lived in Ballinahown, he said famously afterwards that they didn't need a sheriff to evict you. They just built the reservoir, they built the dam, and the water was the sheriff. and you were evicted whether you liked it or not.
Right. And they lost the homes they've been living in for generations?
They lost, some people lost their entire farmsteads. And there was a feeling actually that in some cases they were some of the lucky people because they could actually start freshly. It was the people, particularly on the Ballyknockan side and the Lacan side, where the mountains are, that those farms tended to maybe lose a third of their holding.
Right.
Now this caused a real problem then because they're left with 2/3 of the farm, and it wasn't necessarily as economically viable as it had been when it was a complete farm.
And this was subsistence farming to begin with. It wasn't exactly a huge big
It was
place.
subsistence. These were relatively small farms.
But I mean, it was an extraordinary evacuation when you think about it, because apart from the fact that you had generations of tradition of living and working on these lands, and families going back, for probably for hundreds of years. The graveyard, the cemetery as well, had to be relocated.
That's right. They exhumed an entire cemetery at Burgage and moved it to a new site just a short distance away. Yeah. But this was a huge project. I mean, there was nearly 5,000 acres flooded to create this reservoir. It was one of the biggest infrastructural developments ever done in the state. I mean, if you tried to do it now, it would be very, very difficult, I think. But just to imagine that such, in one case, Ballinahown, one townland right at the centre of the lake, was entirely removed from the map. The entire townland has disappeared. I can't think of any other development that's ever had such an impact on the Irish landscape as this has.
The imprint on the Irish landscape was a transformation of the topography of this region of County Wicklow. But what of the impact on the human population? We'll be meeting a native of a place that no longer exists when we come back. When the Poulaphuca Reservoir flooded these valleys back in 1940, it changed the topography of this landscape forever. The village of Ballymount, which had hitherto been on a ridge, now found itself on a peninsula, connected to the mainland, as it were, by a bridge at one end. Elsewhere in the townlands, field boundaries became shorefronts, and Lacan, Ballyknockan, Ballyboys and Ballynastockan all sacrificed considerable acreage to the rising waters. Monamuk lost more than most. But if Mary Ann Flanagan, now in her 94th year, ever wanted to visit the place where she was born and grew up, then I'm afraid that would not be possible, because the entire townland of Ballinahown is now at the bottom of the lake, completely submerged under the waters of Poulaphuca. Mary Ann Flanagan now lives in Ballyknockan on the shores of her former home townland. And whatever hardships and losses she's had to endure over the years, they haven't dimmed her zest for life nor her cheerful disposition. Mary Ann was 19 years old when she was told she had to leave her home. So she took with her her most precious possessions, things that she still cherishes today. Her memories of growing up in Ballinahown.
See, my daddy was a postman.
Your father was a postman.
That's right.
So he would have walked back in those days.
He fell off a bike and he got such a fright, and he never rode a bike anymore. He walked day and day and day and day up to the time he died, carrying the post to all the houses up the mountains. And when he died, the priest says, I won't say a prayer for Danny. Danny has in heaven the minute he shut his eyes, and there was a smile on his face, and I would like to tell you that.
So what age was your father when he died, Mary Ann?
He was only 64.
And the way your age is going, that's a very young age, 64, isn't it?
It is, for my age. I took after my mother's side. That man that built the chimney up there on the corner.
We were admiring the chimneys on that wee old ruined house.
That's the man brought my grandfather.
Your grandfather did that?
Yeah, done that.
Right, and that was on your mother's side?
Exactly,
right?
he was our father.
So he was a long-lived man.
He was, yeah, long, big, tall man.
You're 94, your next birthday, isn't that the case?
That's the truth.
Right, and you're still well?
Not too bad at all.
You're still well? You're
I always got good health.
Well, you said it was hardship that gave you the good health.
Yes, which we never had a whole lot, you know what I mean. When I got married, I had 12 children then, For the one man, of course, in case you might think I'm a queer one.
I wouldn't think otherwise.
No.
No. You had 12 children.
I had 12 children, bad times, and the man I married was a farmer, you know. You wouldn't get much wage with a farmer, and
Yeah.
we got enough to eat, but that was that.
I'm going to take you back to when you were a younger girl, and you weren't living in Ballyknockan then.
No.
You were living out in the middle of that lake.
Ballyknockan and the cottage where it was down under the Ballyknockan. Big Meadow
A big meadow.
was the name of it.
Yeah. Do you remember when you had to move?
I do. We all cried. We didn't like leaving where we lived now in Big Meadow.
No.
We had a flagged floors, you know.
Yeah. In
That's
the
all.
kitchen.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, there was a man used to come with a melodian, and he'd play until morning.
All night
Big
long.
Christ, he would. He would. Would I not dance? I danced for a fortnight without stopping, never mind at night. We was a great night in playing,
Yeah.
dancing and dancing. I'd be the first on the floor and I'd be the last off it.
What colour was your hair back in those days then?
Oh, it was a brown. Danny was red and I was brown and my sister was fair.
Right. So you were a fine-looking girl, in other words, I think.
I suppose.
And you're still a fine-looking woman.
They
but-
say that anyhow.
No, I wouldn't just say that just to please you. No.
Oh, no, I know you wouldn't.
No. So you were a fine-looking girl, and you were a great dancer.
A great bloody dancer.
Right.
And I used to sing like hell. You'd hear, listen, in Ballyknockan where we lived down, it was a mile back. Listen. It's Mary Ann singing the song. Listen now, lads, listen. And I wouldn't know anyone would be listening to me.
Get away, and you'll be singing away. Do you still sing? Seriously?
Yeah,
Right?
I sing anyhow. Come on, yeah.
Right. You going to give us a verse?
With the holy
Would
one.
you need a man with a melodeon playing along with you, or could you sing without
Oh,
a
we
melodeon?
don't have any melodian.
You don't need any melodeon. Right, are you ready?
Them water is wide, and I can't swim o'er. Need I have the wings to fly? Get me a boat that will carry two, and my love and I shall sail the sea.
However appropriately wistful the song, this wide water wasn't there, of course, when Mary Ann sang it in the kitchen of her home back in Big Meadow. By the time Aidan Cruz and Seamus Balfe were teenagers, the homespun entertainment had given way to the more commercial variety. Seamus, in the centre here, is slightly older, and he would have thought nothing of walking the 3 miles from Lacken to this fine granite construction in Ballyknockan. Nowadays, it's been refurbished as residential apartments, but back in the 1950s, it was something else entirely.
It was known as the Barn Cinema. That's what it was advertised.
The Barn
as.
Cinema.
The
It was
Barn
called the Barn Cinema because,
Called the Barn
because
Cinema.
it was also a barn.
Yes, exactly.
And
Now-
this is where the other side of the building
Yeah,
comes
houses at the back of it here were all cattle underneath and cows. And they were the central heating for the ballroom.
in. They were more than central heating, I've thought
Yeah,
as well.
well, there was odour as well, but nobody minded.
Nobody minded.
No.
Right. But it wasn't just a cinema, was it?
There was a ballroom as well. The seats were removed and dances took place after the cinema, after the picture was shown. On one occasion, of a big dance here, there was an interval after the dance. When the dance stopped, Billy Crawl was the drummer, and he was on the stage, and he leaned back to stretch himself like that, and he disappeared down into the cow manger underneath the ballroom. And a few guys ran out of the place to rescue him. They went down the back way, and they came back up with Billy anyway, took him out of a manger and brought him back into a rousing welcome in the hall, put him back up on the stage. And they were all asking him, "Are you hurt? Are you all right?" And he said, "No, I'm fine, I'm just a bit bruised." He said, "But I'll carry on." And he carried on to the end of the dance with his big smile as usual.
Where did he fall? Did he just fall off the back of the stage?
He fell off the back of the stage. There was no protection at all, down into the manger where the cattle were.
Yeah. You weren't old enough, Aidan, to have ever gone to hear to a dance. Is that
I
the
did,
case?
yes.
You did, seriously?
I did, yes.
Right.
In the 70s, it was a football club in Lacken, and they had a dance here.
And they were still having it, this was all
Well,
still a
this
going
way-
concern in the 70s, was it? Still?
Yeah.
No, well, it wasn't full time, but they had the footballers had one. It was a fundraiser,
Yeah, yeah.
so I had the pleasure of dancing in it.
What about the
Quick-
cinema? Did you ever see
No, I didn't see the cinema.
was gone by the time
That
you-
was gone.
Aye.
Yeah.
One night, particular dance here in 1954, on August Sunday night in 1954. I asked this girl up for a dance, and she obliged. And on inquiring about her background, she told me she was from Dublin. And she was staying in Lacken, in a house in Lacken, in Stephen Cowell's house in Lacken, on a holiday. And I asked to walk her home to Lacken. I was from Lacken myself, so she agreed. Walked home, and on leaving her in Lacken, I asked to meet her in Dublin. When she returned to Dublin, I was working in Dublin myself at the time in a grocery shop. And she agreed to meet in Dublin. So we continued to meet on a regular basis in Dublin for 4 years. And we got married in 1958 in Churchtown in Dublin. And we're still together after 61 years.
Wow. So this was the ballroom of romance.
This was the ballroom of romance. That was
I love the way you put it, after inquiring into her background.
well, that's what
In other words,
everybody does.
where are you from? In other words.
Yeah, all this thing, you'd ask her
Right.
where she was from.
Well, that's a lovely story.
Well, I don't know what it is,
Yes,
but that's
yes.
exactly as it was anyway. But there was also something else unique about dancing at that time. The dancing would stop all of a sudden, and the man and the MC would say, "Change partners, everybody."
Get away.
Yeah, that was a big thing.
Well,
and you
that-
just turned round and took the lady that was nearest to you.
Whether you like to or not.
That was the way it was. And there were several dance halls in the district had that. Even in Dublin, I remember going
So
to dance
even
in
when you
Dublin.
were courting this young lady, you had
It
a
didn't make any difference.
you had to hand her over to somebody else.
You had to hand her over to somebody
And
else.
every-
You wouldn't know what you were getting.
You may have noticed the cut stone corners and the general air of granite gravitas of what was only meant to be a barn originally. The same unsparing attention to detail is much in evidence throughout Ballyknockan, whose resident stonecutters didn't stint when applying their skills to their own village environment. Mind you, when they built the walls lining this laneway, it would have gone much further than it does today. Nonetheless, Aidan and Seamus have something they want to show me where it does come to an end.
If you notice the stone, a lot of them are shaped, and the reason for that was when they'd have no work in the quarry, they used to shape the stones.
It's to pass the time, just, you mean?
Well, he was sooner than having the quarrymen sitting around doing nothing
I see.
and paying them for doing nothing.
Right.
Well, right, they were getting the boundaries done.
Right.
And you can see like the way they're all, a lot of them are quite, quite uniform,
Some of them are uniform and some of them are just sort of shoved on there to get out of the road, more or less.
Yeah.
This whole laneway that we're walking down, what was the purpose of this? Where did this go?
Well, this led down onto this other road that went across
Where
to
the lake
Lacken,
is now.
where the lake, down through under the lake. And one of the roads went to Vallymount,
Right.
and then there was one over to Ballyboys, one into Lacken.
So when we get to the bottom of this lane, does it just go straight into the lake, or does
It was, yes, there'd be a kind of a T junction, and then it goes straight into the lake.
So really, this road is redundant now, isn't it? Because
It is.
doesn't.
Oh, it
just
is,
for walk.
yes.
Right. But they went to a great deal of bother to put these big high walls on either side of it, and it wouldn't really take more than like of 3 men walking down here. Sure, it wouldn't. You could.
That's it.
No.
Yeah, well, it was only an ass and cart is all you'd get down it.
Right. The laneway actually joins the Bog Road, which used to lead to Killick Bog before the lake got in the way. But at this junction also stands a kind of monument, of which local people are rather proud. It's the gable end of what was once the fastest built house in Ireland.
What happened was there was a widow woman had a small family, and she was being evicted, and they were at mass, and the landowner come in and demolished the house while they're away. So the local people here heard about it, and they all rounded up all the stone cutters, carpenters, all the tradesmen. They all assembled here, built the house, and the law at the time was if smoke come out through the gable end of the house within 24 hours, it become a freehold.
Right.
And as it hardened out, the smoke did come out through it, and it was a freehold.
So they built. I've got a photograph here. This is the house that they built originally.
Yes.
In 24 hours.
In 24 hours.
Did that give her a legal status then? Is that the idea? Right.
She become it was a freehold then, and the landowner he come back again, and demolished part of the house, but the locals then they fundraised, they brought him to court, and she was awarded compensation at the time.
Oh, she won the legal battle.
And she won her battle, and there's the original fireplace there that made history.
That's where the smoke came out of?
The smoke came out of that fireplace.
Right. So that's all original, what we're looking at there, back to 1888, isn't that the case?
Yes, and the plaque then, there was a plaque erected then as a statement on the far end of that building.
So the grabber was the villain of the piece, obviously?
Yes.
What local people are proud of, I suspect, is not just the community solidarity which came to the aid of a widow in distress, but the sheer skill and industry that brought this dwelling into being in the space of just one day. That skill and that pride live on in Ballyknockan, as you'll discover when we come back. The census of 1901 tells us that there were 61 families living in Ballyknockan in that year, and that nearly 2/3 of the working population were involved in stone cutting and quarrying. Working with granite was second nature to such men, and the jealously guarded skills and the tools of the trade were always handed on from one generation to the next. In a kind of unconscious emulation of their Neolithic forebears, they cut and shaped the rock under their feet and traded it abroad for flinty rewards. Founded on granite, built from granite, Ballyknockan is in every sense a granite village. The fields around it bordered by granite fence posts, its laneways lined by granite walls. Much of the finer product of the stonecutter's craft is to be found in the great buildings of the metropolis. But just occasionally, as you walk the stony paths of Ballyknockan, you will stumble upon a discarded dream, a flawed masterpiece perhaps, that didn't quite live up to expectations. Sometimes a stonecutter's job must be a very frustrating one. Imagine spending all your time and effort and skill on a job like this, only to discover towards the end that there's either some kind of flaw in the stone or that you've made some kind of basic miscalculation and the whole thing has to be abandoned. That's why this job has been lying here for many years, though for the life of me I can't see what's wrong with it. No prizes for guessing what it was intended to be, but you might be surprised to learn where it was intended for. The inscription, you'll notice, doesn't say lion or a lion, no, it says the lion, suggesting that it's somehow famous. Well, it is in Ballyknockan, and its fame derives, partly at least, from the story that you'll hear in these parts, that it was originally intended as one of a pride of lions, commissioned for the Parliament buildings at Stormont back in the 1920s. I've since been on a lion hunt at Stormont, and I've bagged a couple on the roof. But these are not from Ballyknockan, I'm afraid. The whereabouts of our Wicklow lions remains a mystery. But the story remains a good example of the north-south trade in granite that is, as we know, thousands of years old. Andy Farrington plied that trade of stone cutting in Ballyknockan and elsewhere for most of his adult life, and even for a good bit of his childhood, as he'll tell you. Now that he's retired, he has time to indulge in a pastime for which he's always had a secret passion: stone cutting. The stone he's cutting, into the shape of a harp eventually, is a compound of 3 main ingredients: mica, feldspar and quartz, otherwise known as granite. So you had to learn how to use these.
That's right.
You told me, of course, you learned at a very, very early age.
I did. Watch it. I learned when I go to school, because to national school, my father was a stonecutter. Sometimes he'd get another bout of arthritis, and he'd have to stop off for couple of weeks. But if he felt anyway well, he always had a bit of stone in the yard, and he'd be making a small headstone for somebody, a little Celtic cross or something. And I'd come out to him and start. I loved it from the first day. I started cutting stone in a 12-year-old.
12 years of age.
I did.
Right.
And
were you fit to cut it at that stage?
I was.
Right.
I was.
Even with all the tools
I
and
was.
so on?
Yeah,
Right.
I was. I'd done bits with him. And that's how I went to the trade. I was nearly qualified before I started in the quarry, but so you had to do your...
You had to do your apprenticeship.
I had to do your apprenticeship, and that's it.
But you were already skilled
yeah,
with the tools.
Yeah, I was, because it was him, and I was an only child. And you see, there was nobody... I was a twin, actually. My twin died at birth. Right. But
You had your mind made up from a very early age.
I did.
You were not going to do anything else.
Nothing else. I wanted to do that.
Yeah.
And I still love it.
You still have it?
I think if you take up a piece of stone like that, or even rougher than that, and you create an ornamental piece, and when you have that done, it's in your mind, I did that, and I did it with the bare tools and my, you know, it is a skill.
Enormous satisfaction? Is
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is the word.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now I'm retired, and I come up here to the lads, and they sell me a few little bits of stone. And what I do in my spare time at home, at my own house, I make nice bird bat, little bird bat, 3-piece, a leg, a base, and a nice about 16-inch circle, hull it out.
Right. And it keeps your hand on it.
That keeps me happy.
So if you had any spare time on your hands,
This is
even
it.
though you're retired from this trade,
Yes, I have.
you still do it
It's
because you
in-
love it. Yeah.
It's in the blood, and I have to. I'm not a farmer or anything, you see, so
Yeah.
I go out there and I do that.
Andy spent some of his early years working alongside other stone cutters in Dublin, where he found he still had one very important lesson to learn. Don't leave your tools lying out when you go for your tea break.
When I came back, I had nothing. Every tool
Somebody
I
had taken your tools?
Yeah. And I went to the foreman. Oh my God, he says, Andy, I should have told you. I should have told you. It happens here. And it's not the men on the job, there's people come in and take it.
And they would have been
You know?
precious to you.
Oh, they were precious to me. Lucky enough, I had a few more at home. Some of the lads working with me gave a few to keep me going that day.
You learnt a valuable lesson from that time, did you?
Honest to God.
Right, right.
See, over the quarry here, you laid it where you were, and you never, didn't have.
You trusted all the men around
And it
you.
wasn't the men that was working on the thing, it was others passing
people
by
coming by,
for a few pints or something.
Well, count your tools whenever we're finished today, because I don't want to be accused of touching any of your
I'm
tools.
watching these lads. Now this thing takes it off this way.
A stone cutter's tools are not only precious to him, they are simply essential, for without them he becomes just an ordinary mortal. There aren't many things in nature that are harder than granite, and Andy tells me that after about 4 hours of constant chipping at it, the point of the chisel becomes blunt, or, as they say in the trade, it begins to stiffen. That's when you need a blacksmith on standby with a forge and a whole lot of know-how. Or you get someone like Michael Freeman, who spent quite a few of the last 86 years learning as much about steel as he's learnt about stone.
You have a point in that now.
Point in that, yes, you didn't have one beforehand.
No.
Right, okay.
Right? Now you have to heat it now
Okay.
for me to temper it, like, you know.
So we
'cause
need a
the
bit-
temper won't show up unless I have it red hot.
All right, right. The temper won't show up. While we're waiting for the chisel tip to get red hot, let me tell you a little bit about Michael Freeman. He's a 4th generation Ballyknockan stone cutter, and it was his great-grandfather Ambrose Freeman who created another famous discarded landmark in these parts. Back in 1864, his Madonna and Child, like the Stormont Lion in later years, was rejected. In this case, because the child Jesus, we're told, should have been nestling in Mary's left arm. Mary looks as bemused at that decision as Ambrose's great-grandson remains today. Now, back to the mysterious business of tempering the tip of the chisel.
And temper will move, and I stop it before it gets to the end.
What do you mean when you say temper?
Temper is hardening the seal.
Right, but is that the colour you're referring to?
Yeah, but that's,
Yeah.
a blue and an orange colour.
Right.
And you stop it about 1/8 of an inch before it gets to the tip.
Right.
Yeah, and then you put it up on the stone there with a little trickle of water on it to hold it there.
Right.
That won't get out. Are we ready now?
I'm ready. It sounds like magic what you're
Yeah.
doing, in actual fact, right?
Now, see the temper now? See the colour?
Yeah, yeah.
See it running?
Yeah,
See at the end there?
yeah.
See it? The tip is an orange colour, isn't it? See it?
It is indeed, yeah.
See it?
Right.
Got it? That's it. Up there, and then it won't get away now. Leave that there to cool off on its own time.
You had to work very fast there,
Oh,
didn't
you have to, yeah.
Yeah. So it's a quick, it's a very critical judgment.
It is,
Exactly when you.
definitely, yeah. And then some steels are different. You can leave more temper in one steel than another.
Right. So you have to keep the temper in it, is that what you're saying?
That's that trickle of water there to keep holding the temper there, otherwise you'd get out.
Would you have to do that like during the working day?
Oh, you could do, but although you would carry quite a couple of dozen tools, like, you know, so you get away with a day, like.
Same kind of tool, you'd have to have a number of those?
Oh yes, a toolbox and all, beside your banker.
So this is what you had to have a wee forge nearby all the time.
And we had a bellis with a handle on like that.
Yeah.
Not as modern as this.
Right, this one's all...
Yeah. You have to keep the handle going yourself.
Yeah.
A big bellis.
And a stone cutter would always have a forge like that nearby when you're...
Where there'd be a lot of masons working for the one contractor, he'd have a hired blacksmith.
Right.
And then when you had only a small amount of men working, every stone cutter had to do his own tools.
So you had to learn the skills of that
well
as stone cutting.
That's
in
correct,
words.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're part blacksmith and part stone cutter?
That's correct, yeah.
And the tools would be just coming constantly for him to
Oh
do
yeah, he'd
all
fully
the time?
employed the blacksmith. Oh yeah.
Fully employed and gifted with great patience, no doubt. A man adept at keeping his temper. The days of the dedicated blacksmith may be gone, but the tradition of stone cutting is in good hands. The future of Ballyknockan granite, when we come back. If you're travelling to Ballyknockan via the peninsula of Ballymount, you may not be aware, because of the tree-lined shores, of the waters of Poulaphuca on either side. But you can't fail to notice the striking facade of St. Joseph's Parish Church. The church itself was built in 1803, but the story goes that several decades later, stonecutters from Ballyknockan returned from working in New Mexico and brought with them some exotic ideas for enlivening the architecture of their local parish church. But in truth, the tasteful imprint of the Ballyknockan artisans is to be found all over the beautifully proportioned interior, from the granite baptismal font to the bejewelled light of Harry Clark's stained glass windows, dedicated by and to families strongly associated with the Ballyknockan tradition. This has been for generations now the stonecutter's place of worship, a fact of which Father Downs has been acutely aware since his comparatively recent arrival at Ballymount, and he draws great comfort from that sense of ownership that local people feel towards the church building. So you've been here 8 years.
That's right.
You don't see yourself shifting on from here? Do you think you'll see it?
Probably still have my days here.
Right.
It's people to put up with me for another while.
All right. But you seem to get on very well with the people here.
Well, they're great people. They're very supportive of the church and of the parish. And there's a bit of renovation going on. The roof needs attention. And the back wall has to be attended to. And they've had a number of fundraising events. They've had dances, pub quiz, shave the beard and moustache and head competition.
Yeah.
And they had a play there last week. The neighbouring parish, Ballymore Eustace, put on a play, Sharon's Grave by John B. Keane. And there's people are supporting all these things, so it shows there's a great interest in the church. And at the end of June, the last weekend in June, they're having a mini festival here. It's the 75th anniversary of the flooding of the lake. And they want to commemorate that. There's going to be a special mass here in the church, and Bishop Eamon Walsh is coming to say it. And the old choir's been revived to come back and sing the old hymns and all that.
So it's 75 years since the flooding of
It is, yeah.
to create the Poulaphuca Reservoir.
That's right, yeah.
The 75th anniversary of the arrival of the waters and the submerging of the lost townlands, but also the celebration of the survival of all the things that are made more precious because of that loss. The church itself is one such, and as you bathe in the ethereal light of Harry Clark's windows and read the dedications, you will notice the name McAvoy. And if you wander round the village and townland of Ballyknockan, you'll encounter the same family name many times over. The McAvoys have been working with granite for 5 generations now, and it was in the stoneworks run by John and Dave McAvoy that you saw Andy Farrington and Michael Freeman earlier. The forces of modernity have been harnessed to make life somewhat more convenient, and you'll find angle grinders and diamond-tipped electric saws among the stonecutter's tools. But the delicate artistry of the craft is still a hands-on hammer and chisel application, with all the old skills and sometimes the old tools brought to bear on the finished article. There's still no substitute for the hands, the eyes and the imagination that fashioned granite quernstones here over 5,000 years ago. John on the left here is the older twin by 20 minutes. And whilst they're not exactly identical, they're of one mind when they talk, as they do most eloquently, of the ancient craft that has been handed down to them through the generations.
Your father, your grandfather, your great-grandfather and your great-great-grandfather were all stonecutters.
Yeah, all from this village.
All from the one village.
Yeah, so no one would have grown up too far from where your forefathers would have probably laid down, if you like, you know. So it's
but it wasn't
nice.
the case that when you're a certain age, I don't know what happened to your father in his case, but you're going to be a stonecutter whether you like it or not. It wasn't like that.
See, there was a great pride in being a stonecutter. I mean, when you had young apprentices coming here, and we've heard stories from our father when he was serving his time, when they'd be walking home back down to the village, even if they did nothing during the day, they'd cover their dust or their boots with the dust. Yeah. So when they'd walk down the village, they could be all dusty and dirty, and there was a lot of pride. And if anyone seen them, they'd know they were a stonecutter up in the quarries. So I think for the families moving in, the generations going forward, it was an easy thing to do because there was a lot of pride attached to the job.
And in the past, particularly, it was kept within families, isn't it?
Very strict.
So I mean, I remember hearing a story one time. There was some young guy brought along and start off as an apprentice stonecutter. The rest of the guys went on strike because he wasn't a family member.
Yes, yeah.
So it was jealously guarded.
Yeah, your father had to be a stonecutter for you to be a stonecutter.
Right.
Which was nice. They protected I suppose it was just a form of protecting their jobs and all that as well, you know.
The pride that you talked about, John, has to be because there's so much skill involved in the whole business. Is that the case?
It would be. There's an awful lot of skill involved but you're taking a piece of rock out of the ground and you're creating parts of buildings or monuments or fantastic pieces of churches out of it. And it wasn't an easy process either, it was very difficult.
So you were both, fair to say, like a tradesman, artisan, but you're also an artist as well.
Yeah.
The two kind of walks of life married.
Oh, definitely. Well,
yeah.
You see, you have to have a skill. I remember our father teaching us to try and learn how to see things three-dimensional. Because if you look at a rock in a field and you can look all around it, he'd go, or out in the quarry, and you go, what can I make out of that? What's the maximum, the biggest piece I can get out of that stone? So you learn to look at things in a different kind of way. And not everybody can see things in three-dimensional. Like our father and our uncles, and they were, we'd go to work up here as children to see what they were making. They were creating fantastically engraved pieces, either for monumental or for building. And it was amazing for us to go, how did you do that? How did that come out of that
easy
piece of
for
stone?
them. So easy.
And they wouldn't be too bothered about it. And my uncle used to have a beret hat, and when he'd be finished the piece, he used to just sort of nearly like bless it. He'd smack it down and wipe the dust off it. And it was no big deal for them. But for us to see these creations, it just led us to want to get involved as well and create for ourselves.
Do you have the same skills as they would have
We
had?
would, yeah, because they taught us.
The reason I'm asking is that there's now more mechanisation, isn't there?
True.
There are more tools that work electrically and so on. I mean, are some of the old chiselling skills
The only way still.
Still there?
Yeah, and when you're doing restoration work, you have to use traditional ways. And you have to go back. That's the only way you can copy the finishes that are required. You can't put on a machine. So we're well experienced at it. So
the hands are still
very, very important. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the actual stone itself, this is Ballyknockan.
Ballyknockan granite, yeah.
Would you know Ballyknockan granite just by the look of it?
You would, yeah.
If you had 4 different bits of granite
I
here.
would, yeah.
What's distinctive about it?
It's the grain. If you look at the grain in it, it's tight and it's consistent. You can see the small bits. You see the diamondy flecks, I'll call them for you. Sparkling. And as I was saying, it's a free stone. Ballyknockan granite is a free stone.
Now, to explain what you mean by free stone.
The handiest way to explain it is if you made a ball out of it, no matter what way you look at the ball, it's the same consistency and grain. So you can work it from any direction. Even though it has a going way, stone has a grain too.
A going way.
It has a going way, they call it. It'll split straight down one way, but it'll fight to go another way.
So it's like wood.
Well, like wood, yeah, very much. All stone would be, yeah.
And that goes back to how it was formed millions and millions of years
and how
ago.
it cooled, yeah. And this type of stuff, Ballyknockan, there's only one pocket of it in the mountains here in Ballyknockan that has this specific grain in it.
Right.
And that's what makes it different to all the other granite.
Do you see yourselves as custodians of this to some extent?
We are now, yeah.
Because there used to be an awful lot of people like you, and now there's not.
There's not, no.
Well, when we, both of us, we left school in 92, and this village, 1992 when we left school, this village had about 50, 60 people working in the stone industry. And now here we are, 2015, and there's 5 left, and that's the 5 that work with us.
That's only in your
That's
lifetime?
us. Yeah, that's only in our lifetime, yeah. So, I mean, I suppose we are custodians now because we seem to be the last ones left at it, but we're going to fix that. We're going to try and do something with apprenticeships and set something up now and try and revive this industry.
You've got to break with family tradition and
We
bring
are.
in people who are not members of your own family.
Because somebody that has an interest, you know, if
Yeah.
someone has an interest in learning, it's fantastic because every day is a pleasure to work with somebody like that. If no one has an interest, and you know, obviously they wouldn't be here anyway. You know,
Is there still plenty of Ballyknockan granite?
there are plenty of
Knocking
it.
about.
My father said one time that if it's like the lake, the Poulaphuca Reservoir, it's like if you went down there with a bucket and started taking it out, that's what the granite's like in the ground up here. It's that plentiful.